This is Terry White, author of the Better Minneapolis newsletter and podcast host. I'd like to invite you to become a paid subscriber. You'll gain access to the archive, exclusive live chats, and happy hours. Most importantly, you'll be supporting this reader-supported effort to bring news and commentary focused on Minneapolis to a broader audience. Thank you for listening to today's interview. Hi, welcome to today's podcast. We've got a lot to cover. It's August 5th as I'm recording this, and I've just watched I don't know how long they're going to go on. I was watching the committee of the whole meeting where they discussed the after-action report on the raids that took place at Lake and Bloomington on June 3rd. It's pretty safe to say that a lot of the council members were not happy with what the City Auditor found. They found that the MPD did not violate the separation of power agreement, that they essentially did what they were supposed to do. So many councilors, I watched for about an hour and they were still going, but Chavez, Cashman, Chowdhury, Wonsley all took an opportunity to bash the mayor, the MPD, talk about Trump. Clearly they were not happy with what occurred. And as though no one knows this, they went to great pains to talk about how much Trump's policy is hurting immigrant families. I think most people in the community, whether they're immigrants or not, understand that. And it was really Vetaw who, as usual, is kind of the voice of reason, and she talked about no matter what happens with this agreement, we can't stop federal agents from coming into this city. If they want to do it, they're going to do it. So the auditor did suggest that the agreement be updated. It was written apparently before ICE was a thing, so that seems like a good idea. There was note that there was a communication void of about 4 hours. Well, yeah, it was an ongoing situation, and what really seems to be bothering the city council is that they were not part of the mayor and the MPD's chain of communication as they coordinated what they were doing. I don't know how many people out there would want the city council involved in actual response to emergency. If you watch the meeting, I think you'll see that they do not always act with calm, good decision-making practices. You see a lot of emotion. You see a lot of back and forth disagreements. So trying to manage a ongoing emergency situation with 13 different counselors seems unrealistic. They've shown themselves not only to be competitive with one another, but willing to rush online and spread unverified information on social media. So we support the auditor's findings, update the agreement, recognize the current challenges that all cities are now working through, given the aggressive deportation policy of the federal government. We do expect there will be more raids, and having a hierarchy of communication coming out of the mayor's office and the MPD seems like a good idea, so that probably starting with Payne and letting him know what's going on, and he can, since he's the council president, and then he can let the other council members know. That might be one way to do it. But certainly update it. But I still agree with Vetaw. No matter what is said in there, it's not going to slow down these raids, but we can be better prepared for dealing with them. And I don't know that the counselors getting highly emotional and working to drum up emotions of the people who follow them on social media and their newsletters and stuff is really the way to go. So, the other thing I wanted to get into on today's podcast is just looking at some of the feedback that I've gotten on the last two posts that I've written. There was a lot of interest in them, a lot of feedback, not all of it positive. So the first one is Good Fences Make Good Neighbors. Fraud in Minnesota is a gift to Republicans. So I have a link to it here in the newsletter, but if you haven't read it, I talk about WALT and the Housing Stabilization Services Program, which since I wrote this has since been shut down, and how the DFL not taking action to do more to stop fraud is really helping Republicans. It gives them a giant talking point. Now we're seeing, in addition to Feeding Our Future, we're also seeing this DHS Housing Stabilization Program getting shut down and prosecutions. There's been 50 convictions now in the Feeding Our Future. I think either yesterday or today, the latest happened. And so this doesn't look good, and it's a huge amount of money. Over $1 billion when you combine all the different frauds. And it would really help the Democratic Party to do something about it. Not just here in Minnesota, but I fully expect this story to be part of the conversation in November as the Republicans try and paint Democrats as incapable of running their states. So this is fodder for it. So there's in this newsletter, there's kind of a theme about how important it is to have good fences, and that means good boundaries. And I quote the Robert Frost poem Mending Wall, and just ask people to imagine if there's a field orchard field that is fenced off, and the person who owns the orchard goes away and hunters break in. When one breaks in, they're going to tell others, and before long there's a whole village there. And now the problem is so big that it's not just the owner of that orchard's problem, it's everyone's problem in the surrounding area, in this case the state, and it casts a lot of doubt on the ability of our government to keep us safe. And what we have now is kind of this paralysis in government where they don't seem to want to call out that this is organized crime on a very big scale. I mean, people are going to one program after another and defrauding them because now each fraud, they get money, they get experience, and it's such big money, they can hire people to help them, to build companies to hide what they're doing, and it feels like Minnesota is overwhelmed by this. And part of what the problem is that they won't call it for what it is. It is organized crime being targeted at well-meaning programs, but you just can't set these programs up and not have really, really strong regulation in place and oversight. And it might be a different newsletter to talk about is that expense, all of that oversight and regulation. If we're hiring this work out, the housing work, child care, different programs, elder care, they're all being targeted because we're hiring a network of nonprofits, some of which have not been vetted, and they're stealing money. And would it be better if the government just ran them on their own? I don't know. It'd be really interesting to see a cost analysis there. if we were to hire actual state employees to run some of these programs, because people do need them. I think Democrats in the state do want to help poor, the elder population. All these programs were chosen because they're needed. So it really hurts all of these vulnerable communities when we allow fraud to come into our house as it is and shut them all down. And this leads me to talk about Omar Fateh and his agenda. On his website, he mentions halal loans, which, if you aren't aware, this is Islamic finance reference. They are not allowed to have loans under Sharia law that charge interest or riba. So to me, it makes me very uncomfortable to see and have the possibility of a mayor that would sanction religious-based loans. I think this is a really poor direction to go into. It raises serious constitutional questions. I don't want the government funding loans based on no interest loans tailored to religious doctrines, and whether that's the mosque or a church or synagogue. It needs to be religion neutral. And I think the no interest loan program in general needs to be watched very closely. But just to show consistency, what we're seeing, it might even be voted on today, the Senate Bill 10 in Texas, where they want to display the 10 Commandments in public schools. I'm very, very much against that. I don't know. I mean, this fight just continues over and over again in this country of keeping the state and government, the state and religion separate. And I believe in that. I think people who have faith maybe don't always recognize that they're imposing on others, such as atheists, right? So when you start talking about religious loans or posting doctrines in classrooms, I mean, how does an atheist interpret that? They don't get any holidays. Bill Maher's joked about this, but I agree with it. There's no days off for atheists. And it often feels, if you are an atheist, that this religious messaging is being imposed on you by the state, especially when it happens in public school situations, things like that. So it's really the family, I think, that needs to take care of teaching their children whatever religion they want. An example of how we're blurring the difference between, in this, I'm referring to the state DFL here, or the city DFL, they're blurring the line between religion and public institutions with these prayer breaks at conventions. Why not just call them breaks? Why does it have to be a prayer break? They're timed for Muslims. I get that they want to cater to this group a little bit. They want their votes, but at the same time, they don't recognize the Sabbath or any other religions. I mean, they held the convention on a Saturday. And so I just think that this favoring one religion over another, as the halal loans would do, is a real mistake. So the purpose of city government can be argued, I think, when it comes to how much to do in terms of safety net programs. Minneapolis is part of a tangled web of overlapping state, county, and municipal efforts. It's so tangled, I don't think they really understand where the money is going. It seems beyond the DFL leadership, and it's leading to just a lot of fraud. So if they want to rebuild trust, because right now the Democratic brand is at its worst in 35 years, even despite everything that Trump is doing people still don't trust Democrats. And so this fraud really feeds into that. Offering things like halal loans is going to feed into that. So we need to have some real strict boundaries between politics and religion and public spending. So that's kind of a summary of that particular newsletter. So let me get into some of the comments that I received. There's quite a few. So a lot of people quoted the quotes from Joe Thompson, who's the federal prosecutor overseeing who came out and attacked the DHS housing stabilization program. So someone sent me this quote that they said sums it up perfectly. This is from Joe Thompson. This fraud crisis didn't come out of nowhere. It's the result of widespread failure across nearly every level of leadership in Minnesota. Politicians who turned a blind eye, agencies that failed to act, prosecutors and law enforcement who didn't push hard enough, reporters who ignored the story, community leaders who stayed silent, and a public that wanted to believe it couldn't happen here. Wow, okay, so that's a lot coming from the federal prosecutor. I don't know that anybody gets left out. I think there have been some reporters who haven't ignored the story. I have not ignored the story, but certainly you feel a certain hesitancy in talking about it. When you're and that hesitancy opens the door. I mean, I think the organized criminals who are committing these things know that they're not getting called out, and so they feel emboldened. So moving on, here's another comment. The fraud needs to be addressed for sure. I'm interested with no details listed. The fraud investigation is still going on. Why is the idea of religion being perceived as being implemented into government programs when it hasn't, and the fraud investigation being written together in the article? So I think what this person is questioning is, why am I connecting fraud and religion? And there was other people who maybe didn't see the connection, and so let me make that, is that after seeing all the fraud that has taken place, to then see a candidate who is suggesting that no interest loans are halal loans, one, I think that is opening a window to fraud. But it is also saying we're going to single out a particular religion for these loans. And that, to me, should raise red flags. I mean, this is part of the problem. If politicians are not looking at these programs, and one of the first questions that they ask is who's going to take advantage of this, they are going to be taken advantage of. So that's my answer to that one. Another person says the road to hell is paved with good intentions. Waltz and his believers are on it. This level of fraud suggests gross incompetence and lack of accountability. Your excellent article touches on some of these reasons. I'm wondering if the people in charge have the right skills, knowledge, and abilities to turn this mess around. As an independent, I believe we need a strong two-party system, protect against the excesses of the other, which we do not have in Minneapolis. I am left to hope that future elections give us moderates, because the far left will surely speed us down a bad road with an ideology that has not been effective. And because of this article, they became a paid subscriber, which is fantastic. And I'll just say that I have written in the past, I completely agree with this comment that we don't have a real two-party system. We don't have good checks and balances. We have a machine, and we have a DFL machine in this city, and almost one in the state right now. And whether that is Republican or Democrat, when you have a machine like that with no real check on power, unfortunately, it can often lead to corruption. And, as Thompson said in this, that politicians who turned a blind eye, well, once these frauds occur, people have money. They fund campaigns. All of a sudden, they have more power. And again, the really, really unfortunate loser in this situation are the people who need housing, who need food, who need the help of all these programs that now are going to be slowed down or closed, and they're not going to get the help they need because a few people in these organized crime networks are benefiting. Another person says they are not conspiracy-minded, but that this piece that the local media and others are not saying out loud. Clearly, at this point, it's not just a random person and a handful of their friends that are committing these frauds. So, local media shying away from this fraud story. Seems like it should be bigger. I think they're afraid. They don't want to be called as singling out any particular groups. But it is what it is. There's a systematic problem. Even if employees who work in the government are not benefiting from it, they're still complicit, in this person's opinion. Another person thanks me for the piece, says the observations are right on target, and they're reminded of a piece from July 12, 2024 in the Strib, in which the legislative auditor Judy Randall questioned the Walz administration about fraud, and here they quote the piece. But Randall said another theme emerged from the audits. Some agencies appear to lack a regulatory mindset, with employees focused more on being a helpful partner to program recipients than on oversight. She said the executive branch must instill a regulatory mindset into its agencies, and the legislator must hold it accountable for doing so. Year after year, Randall said, the OLA has found similar cases of financial mismanagement at state agencies. So, this whole fraud thing has not come out of the blue. It's been well documented and brought up for several years, and I think the DFL needs to really ask themselves why. Why have they let this go so long? Is it because they're worried about losing votes from the people who are committing these frauds? Not sure. Is it just bungled? Which kind of would lead right into the Republican idea of Democrats can't run their own states. And as we know, Walz is going to be a target. Possibly he's running for president. We don't know yet. But this is going to hurt him, I should suspect. All right, moving on. The next piece was on protecting workers and supporting labor. And so here I talk a little bit about a different polling method that defines liberals and conservatives and the trade-offs that people might be willing to take. So, for example, there's a winning economic message for liberals of raising the federal minimum wage to $20 an hour. But interestingly, the same amount of people that supported that also believe that racism is a product of individuals who hold racist views, as opposed to believing that racism is built into our society, policies, and institutions. So quite a few people are wondering why I'm talking about the minimum wage in terms of racism. I do think they are connected, and it does seem like Democrats have an opportunity here to support raising the minimum wage. However, I go on to advocate that this be done at a state or a federal level. There are a lot of risks to trying to do it just on a city level. But if you do agree that to raise the minimum wage, but that racism is a product of individuals, then you fall into the largest category of this survey, which is that you are economically liberal but socially conservative. And I think what was really on my mind when I was writing this is that the DFL in general underestimates how socially conservative a lot of people are. I mean, they may want to see, say, programs that help the poor, that protect everyone in our city, but that doesn't necessarily mean that they're comfortable with all the other ideas that we've seen come out of the far left, and so that aren't necessarily, they're more about our views of society and not necessarily the economy and how to help the economy, right? So a perfect example is abortion that the Republicans really figured out in the 80s, where they tied being against abortion and the Christian right, and they tied them to tax cuts. They don't necessarily have anything to do with each other, but the Republicans did an amazing job of tying them together. It was documented in a book by, I think his name is Thomas Frank, called What's the Matter with Kansas, and how they really took advantage of the fact that people were so willing to support candidates that were against abortion, that they would overlook some of the other financial things they were doing, such as big tax cuts. So the other part of this newsletter was that Omar Fateh's economic development platform, if you go look at it, there's really nothing in there about how he's going to attract investment in the city. His proposal reads very much like a union organizer's proposal. He talks about working with public employee unions, overhauling human resources so that complaints are given more credence. He wants to raise the city minimum wage. He supports the Labor Standard Board. All very much what you would see the unions wanting, which is not necessarily a bad thing. This is a union town, especially for public employees. But there's a large private sector, and I mentioned Target, Ecolab, Medtronic, or General Mills. Like, all of these entities are not really impacted by better practices for employees for the city. What they want is stability, they want safety, they want good schools, and so there's really no plan in the Fateh wheelhouse here on how to address those things, how to bring in the investors that are going to help the myriad of businesses that depend on some of these big companies. There's just no strategy there. And there's no recognition that when something like Target leaves town, it hurts caterers, designers, photographers, salespeople, architects, construction crews, and all these other businesses that they use in the community to help them function. And so we really need a mayor who isn't afraid to promote the city as a place for private businesses to come. We want businesses to come here, to stay, to grow, and hire. And a lot of the Democratic Socialists just seem completely uninterested in this part of the equation. And when people talk about them being extreme, to me, this gets to the heart of it. That it's all about union demands, labor demands, with no other part of the conversation about how do we get more people to come to the city? How do we get businesses here so that there are jobs? And part of that is that a lot of our elected officials have never been in private industry. They've worked in nonprofits. They've worked in government roles. And so that's really where their focus is. And it would be great to see them get out there. We get out there and mingle more with some of the people that are building companies, immigrants, all the way up to the giant C-suite targets of the world. But it seems like they're creating this antagonistic framework where they won't even talk to what the needs are of some of these bigger employers. And just one example of some of the ways that policies can backfire, the current minimum wage that we have has resulted in this strange thing where teenagers in the city who want to work at these entry-level jobs are often unable to find them and have to go out to the suburbs where the wages are lower to find work, because a lot of the people from the suburbs have come in to the city to get those higher paying jobs. And so, of course, that leads to more traffic, more emissions, and I've sat around at baseball games listening to many parents complain how their teenage children cannot find jobs in the city because of that. So I conclude this by saying that Minneapolis is definitely a union town, but we need both pro-labor and pro-business. You cannot just be all pro-labor and not think about how we can help private businesses. And that, like I said, that includes the mom-and-pop grocery stores all the way up through the multi-billion-dollar corporations. It has to be part of the program. And without that private sector growth, it hurts the city. It hurts. It means that we don't have the tax base that we need in the city to fund all the programs that we want to fund and all that good stuff that makes our city more livable than others. Okay, so let's dig into a few of the comments on this one. It got a lot, particularly out on Reddit. A lot of this first one here is positive one. He'd say he would broaden the statement to include consideration of secondary effects, e.g. the rent control crowd seems to be oblivious to what's going to happen with landlord and developer investment, and mentions the Dunning-Kruger effect, a cognitive bias in which people with limited competence in a particular domain overestimate their abilities. Seems to be a real problem in many of our local elected officials. They have ideas and believe they know the answers, but have almost no ability to think beyond their noses. How do we get them to see what they can't see? Okay, that got a lot of likes. So I'm not alone. A lot of people seem to agree that we could benefit from a council that has more experience, broader competence. Another person says, this is a key aspect that needs to be addressed. How can Minneapolis be vibrant without a strong business base? I don't think it can. Thanks for pointing that out and the unintended consequences of certain policies. So those are some of the positive ones. What's interesting when I switch over to some of the comments that I got on Reddit, you see a lot more negativity, a lot of people who just really don't care about business at all, see it as the problem. So, for example, One, they think that my piece was anti-union, and God forbid workers have a democratic process in their workplace. So I don't think I was saying that at all, but they jump there when you put up any kind of reference to wanting to support private business. It means it's this very cut and dry way of thinking that it's one or the other. Another person kind of agrees with them, says, so tired of this bullshit narrative that we need to coddle businesses and give them tax breaks or reduce regulation for them to come here, stay here. It's a privilege for them to be here, and any company that leaves will shortly have another that fills that gap. That seems maybe overly optimistic to me. I don't know what companies they think are going to come here, especially if we don't have a mayor and a city council that's actively trying to get them here. Not sure what they mean by coddling businesses or tax breaks or reducing regulation. I didn't mention any of those things. But sending a signal that we want them here and working with them to meet their needs is important. Another person says it's high time that the workers took control back. Businesses should not be in control of so many aspects of our lives. There can be compromise, sure, but we don't need to be dumping money out to beg private businesses to move here either. Well, again, I'm not really advocating that we beg them to come here, but it's about creating an atmosphere that they want to be here, and no business is going to come here and say, yes, we want the workers to control our business. I mean, that's maybe, yeah, I don't know how people think that's going to work. I mean, I would agree, however, that businesses should not be in control of so many aspects of our lives. It is, I think, hurting the country right now that to get health insurance, you have to go to an employer, a big one. It would be really beneficial to a lot of people if they could separate their health care from their business, and I know the exchange does that to a certain extent, but you don't get nearly the same benefits that you do through private insurance working at a big corporation. It's one of the benefits that they dangle in front of you. And a lot of people, myself included, have stayed at jobs that they would have left long ago if they didn't have to provide health care for their family. So agree with them on separating businesses from controlling so many aspects of our life. Disagree that I was saying we need to dump money on them. I think even just showing that we want them here might be enough. But we have to create that atmosphere. There has to be safe streets, good schools, reasons to come here, an educated workforce. Another person talks about the empty storefronts tell a different tale. We don't need to coddle businesses, but we shouldn't punish them for being here either. So that kind of speaks to what I was just saying. And the empty storefronts, I'm actually reminded of a recent trip I took with Dan Orban through Ward 9 and how many businesses, small immigrant businesses, have closed up in that ward and moved on because they're just very little is being done about roving groups of drug users, homeless people, crime. So in that instance, it's not hurting Target, it's hurting very small businesses that were run by immigrants, that first rung for them to get a foothold and improve their lives of their families. It's being taken away from them by inaction from city government. Here's another one. We should be investing resources in attracting small, local focused businesses. Don't disagree there. Having a lot of small local businesses makes for an interesting neighborhood. They point to the Carmel Mall as an example, comparing that to the old Hennepin Lake Corner, which is dead. The Carmel Mall is full of spots for people who live in the surrounding neighborhood, not high-end kitchenware, cosmetics, big box retail, or other suburban mall-type places. I've heard this from a number of people. They don't want to see Uptown turned into a suburban mall. I tend to agree with that. But that's where city government can work with people within the community and the people who own the real estate there to figure out how do we make this more interesting? How do we get businesses in here? And we see a few have come in, but there are like 4 coffee shops there now, so we'll see how that goes. Another person talks about investing in locally owned small businesses that hire locally, sell things people living nearby need, and are going to then attract visitors because they are unique. Yeah, another person agrees with them 100%. It says that small businesses can't afford these property taxes. Large corporate stores can. That's why small businesses are leaving, and we will only be left with chain stores. Love to hear from people what they think of that one. That would seem to have some merit. It is hard to afford the property taxes when you're just getting started, and maybe that's something the city can help with, some sort of abatement of property taxes for the first couple of years. But obviously we need to spread out the property tax base, get more money from the state, something in order to focus on building back Minneapolis. So the next one, they say we should be giving those smaller businesses the incentives and assistance instead of the mega corps. Commercial landlords make more money sometimes by leaving buildings empty rather than lowering rents, and they are starting to address that very big issue too. Well, I'd love to hear from some landlords who are making more money leaving their building empty, because I think that's this rumor that gets spread online that isn't necessarily true. I think there's a lot of commercial landlords that have loans on their properties, and if they lower the rents, it triggers a whole host of problems for them, because then the bank reassesses the value of that building. And so if you borrow $1 million to buy a building and then it gets reassessed down to $500,000, then the bank's going to come to you for $500,000 because you have $1 million loan, and that is going to put a lot of people out of business. So there can be many reasons for buildings being left empty, but the city has to be willing to work with them to try and figure that out, how to fill up these buildings without bankrupting a lot of people around the city. Let's see here. Another one talks about incentives for mega corps to hire work from home folks in the city. Okay. Well, I think I've covered a good broad spectrum of them here. Another person responding says, spot on, do the math. The DSA is making promises they can't deliver on. Capital flight out of Minneapolis. Workers must get back to work downtown. The DSA needs to stop demonizing developers and businesses, as the only system that brings people out of poverty is capitalism. So I think that really speaks to how do you make some of these programs work that are being proposed, like municipal grocery stores. We talked about that earlier. It sounds good, but actually delivering on it would be very difficult. And I think candidates use these things to talk about hunger, to drum up support, and maybe that works for them, but when you step back and analyze it from a business perspective, is it actually going to be sustainable? How much it would cost? Could you actually get fresh produce in the stores? What happens if people want sugary snacks in the stores? Like, all these different issues start to crop up when you really start to get down into the details. And as this person says here, if you just keep demonizing developers and businesses, they're not going to want to come here. So again, people go right to the extreme and say you got to coddle these people. I don't know that that's what I was saying or what a lot of other people are saying. It's more about, let's find some programs that show them they're welcome, that work, that make business sense, as opposed to having the first reaction being that they're terrible, and that they're here to exploit workers. And yeah, some businesses do exploit their workers, absolutely, but because some of those companies do, it doesn't mean we can draw a blanket criticism of all business. I mean, a lot of people here put their families through high school, college, pay for childcare, all those things because they work at private business. So it's got to be part of the conversation. We need a mayor that's a good cheerleader. We really do. A mayor who just steps into office and tears down the city and doesn't have a plan for attracting investors is going to hurt the city. All right, well, great. Thank you for listening. Newsletters are out there. Please have a read, become a subscriber. Have a good day. Bye.